The ACC Coastal is a mess. It is a complete mess, but we love it. It's college football. It's college football, not at the elite level, but it's college football with competition among 5 or 6 teams that are just about neck and neck. And that's the result. Those are the kind of games we get. North Carolina at Pitt. Panthers lead 24-10 in the fourth quarter. Give it up to North Carolina, who had come back for the first time in what would have been a 15-year span and coming back from 14 down late in the ball game to win a game, but they couldn't complete the comeback. They go to overtime and Pitt scores. North Carolina cannot. Panthers win it 34-27. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and nobody's on the line right now. I appreciate that you guys don't know when the notifications are coming, when the live stream schedule is going to be set. I appreciate you guys jumping on the line right now. My goal is that post-season, after the college football season, is that we will set a schedule for our live streams here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So thank you for being right on the button, ready to go, and to grab that notification and join us here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I took in the win by Pitt over North Carolina 34-27 in overtime, and I guess we got a call in. That's why we're here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark. It's McD Sports 4. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, McD. What's going on, man?
Just want to talk some football, college football. I'm kind of disgusted right now with North Carolina. So, yeah, I mean, I wish you would have missed that field goal. I took North Carolina +4.
Okay. That's what it's all about. That's why you're disgruntled with North Carolina. Me, on the other hand, in taking Pitt to cover the 4, very happy with the result at the end of the game. And that's what happens in overtime, as you well know, as an experienced gambler in the sports arena, in the football arena. You go to overtime. Sometimes you just want the team that you've taken with the points just to lose, and lose by that final field goal in regulation. You don't want overtime because there's always that chance that the team that scores first gets the shutout on the other end, because the other team obviously has to score the touchdown and the field goal does no good. So it's all or nothing, and you lose by a touchdown. And in this kind of case where you actually made a good selection, you made a great selection, McD. You know, as a bettor, as a professional, they would say you made the right selection. It just didn't come out for you tonight.
Yeah. I mean, I took North Carolina because they always seem to be a close game. I thought maybe they could only lose by a field goal, maybe even just win it or something. But it's whatever. I mean, I only played like $1 down the game, so it's not like I'm losing
Okay.
billion.
Okay. Very nice.
Yeah. But I then just want to talk about these games. Maryland is not playing this weekend, so we want to talk about them. Congrats on your Ohio State Buckeyes last week against us. I think personally I have a few issues with the Buckeyes right now, but it's whatever. But I personally think that the game of the week to watch is going to be this Baylor-Oklahoma game. And I think this game is going to be very close. I think Baylor is going to pull off the upset. Technically, it is an upset since Baylor is a 10-point underdog last time I checked.
Yep.
I mean, that's what I took it at. So I took it at +10. So.
Well, the thought is that Baylor might have the weakest resume of the playoff contenders and may need to go undefeated. Even if they win a Big 12 championship with 1 loss, that may not be enough because of the awful non-conference and because the Big 12 passed Baylor and Oklahoma being kind of a Pac-12 mess of decent teams, but no really, really good teams, and that Baylor's just going to have the sweep over Oklahoma, or maybe a split of Oklahoma. Maybe they win the Big 12 championship game over the Sooners after they lose on Saturday, and maybe that's not enough. That being the talk around Baylor. That being the talk around Minnesota to a certain extent. Many people believe that they have to go undefeated as well. I am not one of them. I have to think that if Minnesota emerges as the Big Ten champion with one loss, that has to be enough.
Well, I agree with you. I do think Minnesota, however, loses this upcoming Saturday by a field goal. Don't put any money on that one, but I personally think that Iowa's going to get them this weekend. I mean, in my opinion, I think Iowa, the resume is actually not that good for Iowa if you think about it, because the best one is Iowa State, and there's a bunch of nobody that they beat. But I still think Iowa's a good team, so that's my opinion. So the matchup I think you got to jump on, though, is the last time I checked it, I think you got to jump on Temple +6.
Who's Temple playing? That game doesn't come to mind.
Tulane at noon. Tulane versus Temple. Temple +6.
Oh, they're getting 6. See, when I was doing my top 25, I was looking at the American Conference, and yeah, I did come across that when I was looking at the line. So I posted my predictions last night, as I typically do, and I saw that as well. I like that play with the Owls and the 6 points in the American. Yes, good play, McD.
I jumped all over that at +6. So I mean, we'll see what happens. Whenever I pick Temple, they usually seem to win. Whenever I jump on them, and cover. So Temple's one of those teams. Despite them being my Terps back in week 3, I mean, they've actually made me some money. So I guess I'll forgive them.
What issues do you have with the Buckeyes? You had mentioned that you've got some issues with Ohio State.
I don't understand why they're coming out saying, the Ohio State Buckeyes saying they're going to show no mercy on Maryland because they scored 51 on them last year. And they sat up there acting like they needed proof something against Maryland. I thought they just threw the whole playbook at us for no particular reason. Like the onside kick, them calling timeouts up 42-0. I mean, are you kidding me?
So I'm going to side with you here, McD. I'm going to side with you, and then I'll let you go, or let you continue your point, is because, yeah, it would be one thing if there were words exchanged last year, there was disrespect shown, or maybe there were some cheap shots, some dirty plays. Maryland just played an outstanding game and put up 51 points and came within, inches of putting up 53 in the win. And Ohio State should not take offense to that. They just nearly gave up a 3 to 4 touchdown point spread for the loss of the season in the Big Ten. That there was nothing wrong that Maryland did in that game. Just play a really good football game and just explode on offense. That Ohio State would take exception to that to be able to rub it in. So you're alluding to the onside kick in particular by the Buckeyes?
Well, I would say this. It was a sweet onside kick.
It was.
I mean, do that against somebody like Penn State or somebody.
When it matters.
Yeah, when it matters. Don't do that when you're a 43-point favorite, only up 14-0. And then don't sit there and call a timeout so you can try to go block a punt up 42-0. I mean, I don't know what Ohio State was doing. And then in the second half, they just wouldn't let up. Like, they would keep on throwing these, plays at us. And it was like, you guys are playing like you're tied at 28. I mean, you guys up, 49 to nothing. I mean, just hand the damn ball off. I get it, we lost. I mean, I understand that. But just hand the damn ball off at 42-0, at 49-0.
You're old school, McD. You're just a kid, but you're old school here. Or is this just because it's Maryland?
Here's what I believe. I believe that I believe in that whole way you got to win, you got to stop it and everything. But once it's 42-0, I mean,
well, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that line?
I draw it when it's 30 35-0, 42-0. Just run up.
But that's
Just
okay.
run up some.
Okay, well let's draw the line right here. So there are people, there are old school people that believe when the game is won, when there is no question that the game is over, even though there is still time on the clock, that the game has been won, that you run the ball, you don't run any trick plays. Some people even go to the extent that you don't pass the ball. You obviously don't run any onside kicks, do anything like that. Again, no trick plays, nothing to degrade your opposition, to make them look bad, to rub it in, anything like that. That is one thought that you just class in a class manner, take your win and don't rub it in, and you do all you can to pull back. Okay, that's one thought. The other thought is that, hey, we're talking about competitive athletes. Now, some people make the distinction between the NFL because they're paid athletes, they're professionals, that all goes regardless. Hey, you're a professional, stop them. Don't let them score. If you're a professional, then all is fair. Some people draw the line between that and college, where it's a student athlete. They're not being paid. But some people say, hey, at this level, it's competitive athletics. Stop them. If you don't like it, stop them. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong. I tend to I used to lean more heavily on the side of run the ball, run the clock out, don't run trick plays, don't rub their face in it, be classy, so forth and so on. There are some interesting comments right now, McD, in the chat concerning that. We've got some Ohio State fans chiming in. Well, David Green Shield and Cheryl are mentioning that the Buckeyes did have their second and third stringers in early in that game.
I understand that, and I completely agree. They were in probably when it was 28-0, but they were still running the same offense. They were still running trick plays. I mean, I just thought it was classless, especially in the second half. Especially in the second half. Like, the onside kick, I could get past that. If it was a 14-0 game, the game was still kind of not like in doubt. But I mean, to call timeout to 42-0 to try to block a punt going into halftime, I mean, to make it 49-0, I thought that was a bit excessive. I thought the play calling, they didn't let up on the play calling. Like, I don't believe you should hand off the ball every time, but like, be conservative on 42-0. Like, don't sit there and keep on throwing the playbook. Because let me tell you something, they play Rutgers this weekend, Ohio State, which I do expect them to win. It's a 52.5-point spread, and I do think they cover that. But that game's only something like 55-7 or something like that. And I'm probably not going to watch any of the game. But if it looks like, looking at the scoreboard watching, if Ohio State's like lighting up after they go up 35-0, you better expect me calling in here and absolutely ripping Ohio State a new one. Because I thought that was absolutely disrespectful and classless what they did in the second half. Because what Maryland did to them last year, we did not trash talk them. We went out there in that game last year with a bowl game on the line, basically, and we basically played our tails off, and we came up a bit short. So, I mean, I understand, like, we were 43-point underdogs. They were expecting to get blown out. I get that. But that game was 42-0 in the second half. There's rules in high school leagues, and some high school leagues, that you have to explain a loss, or you have to explain a victory if it's 42 points or more. And if there's not been enough explanation, they will suspend the coach for one game. So I personally think that I think the college Maryland needs to recruit better players. I think the talent, personally, I don't think the talent is too much off between us and Ohio State, but we're a team, rookie head coach, and God, I forget his name, Mike Loxley, and hopefully the game's closer next year to get him in College Park, but I thought that was absolutely classless. in the second half with Ohio State. That's just my opinion watching the whole game from start to end. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but I just want to get my 2 cents in. And I was hoping that my call wasn't all about Ohio State last week, but it turns out it was. It's whatever. I'm hoping that Georgia wins. I'm hoping that I'm hoping that Iowa wins. I'm hoping that Notre Dame wins. I'm hoping that Baylor wins in the top 25 matchups. That's all I really have before I get completely disgusted with this. Thanks for taking my call, Mark. Go Terps, and hopefully we win the last 2 against Nebraska and Michigan State.
Thanks, McD. Appreciate it. You have a great weekend. Enjoy the football. So McD Sports is definitely of the opinion that you take the classy route. He might be a little bit more in that camp because it happened to his team, the Maryland Terps. I did not watch the second half of the Buckeyes and Maryland game. I'm trying to watch all the games at the same time, and I did watch most of the first half, Ohio State and Maryland, but obviously it wasn't much of a game after a few minutes, and many of us knew that it was never going to be a game, and there were just too many big games to keep track of. So I didn't see anything that was alluded to in regards to Ohio State going for the jugular in the second half when they were up 42-0, 49-0, et cetera, et cetera. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Mark? It's DeAndre. How you doing?
Hey, DeAndre. How are you?
Doing good. Hoping Auburn beats Georgia this weekend. No, Auburn beats Georgia. LSU loses to Georgia in the championship game. And Minnesota loses one, but beat Ohio State in the championship game. I'd like to see what the committee would do with all of that.
I would love it too, DeAndre. I just want to see complete chaos because anything that could possibly happen to debunk this system, to show it to be the farce that it is, I am all for. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And the thing I don't get, Mark, and this is nothing against any of the other teams. I don't get, are you looking at the eye test? Are you looking at the shuffle schedule? I can't figure it out, Mark. That's what I don't get. And that's all good. Don't get me wrong, Ohio State is really good. That game control, they're excellent. But my issue is, like Georgia. Why is Georgia in front of Minnesota? And go ahead and say, I know everybody's going to say, well, Georgia played the hardest schedule. Yeah, but they still got one loss.
And it's not a very good loss.
Right. Yeah, to a 4-8 South Carolina team.
Well, they haven't played that many games yet, but they're headed that way. I've got Minnesota at 5 and Georgia at 6 in my rankings.
Right. So, yes, I have a lot of issues with some of the rankings. Who else did I have an issue with? Alabama. Okay. Why is Alabama for the Oregon and what's it called? I know Alabama loss is better than LSU. Oregon's loss, but at the same time, Oregon played a harder schedule at the time.
Yes.
Than Alabama. I don't understand all of that.
Well, you don't understand it because none of the rest of us do either, DeAndre, because what the committee does is that they change the rules depending on the team. So when they argue, when they're asked by Reese Davis in particular, who hosts the college football show on ESPN that following the committee selections every Tuesday night, they seem to gravitate to whatever argument will back up that particular ranking. So when they're asked about a certain team, they'll defend their loss as being one of the best losses in the country because it was such a good team and it was a close game. Then other teams, they'll magnify and emphasize the wins that they have, even though they've got a really bad loss, i.e. a Georgia situation where they lose to South Carolina at home, but they've got a couple better wins than some other teams with Notre Dame and Florida in particular. It depends. Then they'll talk eye test with some teams. They'll talk strength of schedule with other teams. They'll talk game control. And it all factors in. And we have to understand that the one person that is speaking on behalf of the committee is simply doing that. He is speaking on behalf of the entire committee. And it's just the committee takes all those things into consideration, but each individual member of the committee takes all those components into consideration at different levels. Some of them just go strictly, hey, this is my eye test, and I believe this team's the best. Regardless, I think Clemson's the best, for example. Let's say, I'm sure there are people in that room that say Clemson's the best football team. I don't care. I know that what they accomplished last year and that they brought back most of that team and they're this good. And even though they haven't played anybody really that difficult, they're the defending champs. And until they lose, I'm going to vote them number one. That's a certain viewpoint.
Right.
And we could go through the line of LSU having the best resume, Ohio State having the best by far game control of just dominating everybody start to finish every game. So it depends on the person. So DeAndre, I noticed last night, yes, I noticed that you were in our either Miami or Florida State live chat, and maybe I didn't get to a couple of your questions, and you seem to be a little disgruntled. So DeAndre, DeAndre, that if I see any of your questions, I'm going to get to them. But I cannot, if you could see what I see as I try to put the comments and the questions on the screen, you would realize why I can't get to everything or see everything.
Okay. I just want to know why all the Miami fans are saying that Justin Floton with who is it? Miami, and then nobody else is saying that he's committed to Miami. I heard Hurricane Zoe say it, but I haven't heard it. Nobody else now.
I haven't heard it either.
And everybody saying,
they're excited because he's visited a couple times. And of course, there's going to be all the pictures taken of him wearing Miami garb and putting that on social media.
Okay. All right, Mark. I got to roll. Got to get back to work here.
Thanks, DeAndre. I appreciate the call. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, following Pitt's win over North Carolina, 34-27 in overtime. I took in this game start to finish. I did have the Browns and the Steelers on as well. I know Cheryl mentioned that. Brownies win it, I believe, 21-7. Yes, Mason Rudolph, for us college football fans. Of course, Mason Rudolph, prolific quarterback at Oklahoma State, having a rough time in the NFL. Really has not adapted his game to the NFL. I don't know that the arm strength is what it needs to be based on what I've seen. He also makes some poor decisions, misses guys. And when I say misses guys, misses defenders. He doesn't see the coverage, and he threw some bad picks tonight. Bad picks in regards to both bad throws, that he just overthrew a dude, and the safety was just standing there waiting for the ball. Other times where he didn't see the coverage, and he threw one right to the linebacker that was up in coverage. Here's the safety. Here's the linebacker. His wide receiver's coming across. He thinks he's got him. The linebacker's just doop. And this has been almost every week with Mason Rudolph. So I don't know that he's an NFL quarterback, a starting NFL quarterback. But it is an interesting conversation, taking sides of whether you're in the camp of they're athletes, they're competitors, and until the final whistle blows, regardless of what the score is, it's all fair. Run trick plays, run onside kicks, do whatever you want, block punts, run a 2-minute offense, run up tempo, try to throw as many plays as you want, run up the score because you're competitors. And if they're true competitors, then they don't want to be taken as a sacrificial lamb or be considered martyrs. They would say, compete, go as hard as you can till the final whistle blows. It's all fair. It's all fair game. That is obviously a newer approach to athletics. The rub it in, regardless, there shouldn't be any complaints. There's the old school approach. that if you're classy, then and you respect your opponent and respect the game, then you will not run up the score. And there's a number of reasons why you don't do that, because you're going to face that team later in the season or maybe the next season, depending on the sport, and it may be done to you later. That's one reason. The other is just you respect them as a competitor and you don't want to make them look bad. You don't want to humiliate them. On the other hand, let's understand that in today's football, in particular, we're talking football, but we could take this to baseball and other sports, but we'll stick to football. There are more comebacks in today's football because of the proficiency of the passing game and because of the up-tempo style and the amount of plays that are being run and the athleticism of the players. There are more comebacks and less leads are safe in today's football. Go back 20, 25, 30 years. Remember watching football back then, and if you saw a team with a 21-7 lead in the fourth quarter, you figured the game was over. And if the team that had 7 points came back and won that game, you wouldn't be shocked. It wasn't like it never happened, but that was a great comeback. When you've got a 21-7 lead in the fourth quarter and we're watching college football now with 10 minutes left, we're just watching a 21-7 lead. And sure, it's an advantage to have a 14-point lead in the fourth quarter, but it by no means is over. So for those teams and those players and those fans that complain about teams that go full throttle, all out, throw the ball all the time, rub it in, they would often also have to guarantee, hey, if we want you to stop that and go the classy route, the classy approach, and just run the ball and run out the clock, then we're going to promise not to come back. It's almost like the teams that steal bases in baseball. That's a cardinal sin as well. If you're up 10-1, you don't steal bases because it's rubbing it in. Well, if you can guarantee, if the other team would promise, hey, we're not going to hit any home runs or score runs to get back in the game and possibly come back from 10-1 and win the game, then we can make that deal. You don't steal bases, we don't score runs. All right, enough of that. Week 12 of college football. And of course, we've got a number of very important games. The three most important games that come to mind, the Minnesota game against Iowa, of course, the Gophers shooting for not just the Big Ten Western Division Championship, but the Big Ten and the college football playoff at 9-0. Iowa, as McNee for Sports 4 let us know, the Hawkeyes are a 3-point favorite at home. Minnesota has not won in Iowa since 1999. They have lost, I believe, 8 consecutive games to the Hawkeyes. Iowa's been a much better program in recent years for a long, long time. And Vegas still doesn't entirely believe in Minnesota. And I can understand that. They've played one really good opponent. They played one really inspired, tight game. That was a well-executed game plan. If you watched Minnesota play Penn State, that was an exceptional game in regards to offensive concepts and approach that Minnesota put on Penn State. Masterfully called game by the Minnesota offense. I don't recall the Minnesota offensive coordinator off the top of my head, but he did a great job. Joe Rossi on defense as well. And Minnesota just won by 5, but they were clearly the better team last Saturday. I am still not convinced that they're a better team than Penn State, but they were much better last Saturday. 41 folks on the line. I appreciate it, especially since we did not announce this, and it was just a late notification that we would be on the line taking your calls. And so I'll get the number up there, 860-325-3687. And, of course, we'll focus on the college football playoff, the possible scenarios that are out there. I had asked a question the other day in regards to various college football playoff scenarios that you would like me to cover and review and run down, and my thoughts on said scenario and what would happen, what should happen, what should the committee select, and what would they select. And there's a lot of great ones out there. And I will not have the opportunity, this being on a Thursday night, to get to those. by Saturday. So things may, of course, change by Saturday, but I will get to those scenarios sometime next week and have to tweak a few of them depending on the scenarios and how they play out this weekend. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Yeah, good morning, Matt.
Oh, there he is.
Uncle Lou here.
Uncle Lou, what's going on, man?
Oh, man, I'm so excited to inform the people that you're coming on the Uncle Lou show. This is great news.
It will be a fun time. I may not be awake, but
I'm never awake. Doesn't matter. Man, you got a lot of nerve, Mark Rogers, openly inviting people to ask you about playoff scenarios so that you can explain them. Man, are you bored? What's the deal here?
Oh, I'm bored at times. Yes. Well, I'm really not bored when it comes down to it.
You've been doing that since September?
What college football playoff scenarios? Sure.
Yeah, you've been doing that since September, man. That's all anybody ever wants to know.
That's all they want to know. They don't care. I just watched this Pitt, North Carolina game. Nobody cares about that. They can't go to the playoffs. That's all anybody cares about is that playoff. And I get it. I get it.
My favorite ones are the ones that have 3 SEC teams getting in, and then the ones that have no SEC teams getting in.
Well, that's what they're rooting for. Do you think we get 2?
Chaos.
We can definitely get 2. That's easy to see.
Somebody actually asked me about that earlier. I've had a principled philosophy since the playoffs started that I don't think the loser of a conference championship game should get in. I know that's not really realistic because you look at Notre Dame or you look at like the Alabama 2017 scenario. They don't even have to play in one and they get in. So, and I don't think the playoff committee feels that way. But so if LSU were to lose by 3 points to Georgia, they probably would still get in. I just don't really think they should, but I think they probably will. I mean, they're one of the 4 best teams. Their only loss is that game by 3 points or something. Now, if they lose by 10, no, I don't think they get in. But if they lose close, I think they do. I don't know if there's another team that could get in. Like, I don't know if Clemson would get in if they lost the ACC title game.
So based on our conversations, Lou, I'm guessing you're an eyeball test guy, but the resume's got to line up. It's got to be reasonable, but that you're more of a guy that says, hey, I've been watching college football all year. I've been watching these teams over and over and over. I can tell you these are the 4 best teams. And obviously the resume's got to be reasonable. You're not going to throw some 8-4 team in there. But that's based on our conversations and what I've heard out of you sounds like that's your approach.
Well, I try to do both. Like I do think Ohio State is the best team, but I put LSU 1.
Yep.
I think you're splitting them. I don't think you're wrong either way.
Yep.
I think you're wrong if you have anybody other than those 2. I heard you talking earlier about arguments for Clemson, and I get that, and I think Clemson is clearly 3. Like, I don't think there's any way you could have anyone else ahead of them, including Minnesota or Baylor. But they're not 28-0 or whatever, 25-0. They're 9-0.
Absolutely.
And they've looked really good the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially. I mean, I had them as low as 5 at one point, first 6 weeks of the season, but they're clearly 3 now. I think Ohio State's better than LSU, but splitting hairs. So since LSU has one more, I think, quality win than Ohio State does, and they're so close, the records are the same. So I put LSU 1 this week in Ohio State 2. So if I was just going by the eye test, I would put Ohio State 1. I think Ohio State would be favored against LSU.
Oh, I think so. And just to be clear, see, the Clemson argument, that's not my argument. I'm not making that argument. I don't have Clemson number 1. I've got them number 3. I was just stating that the caller said, what are these people looking at? Because I hear this and I hear that and I hear this. And I said, well, that's exactly the point is that everybody has their pecking order of resume 1, eyeball test 2, schedule 3, etc. And then person B has it rearranged another way. And that's the, there's a particular analyst that I will not name just because of my affiliations, that basically says Clemson won it last year. They're the defending national champions, so they're always going to be number 1 for me, regardless of whether they win every game by 1 point and look like crap. They've been number 1 for me. They're going to stay number 1. I think that's a ridiculous argument, just as you just stated, because the schedule doesn't back it up, and the performance on the field has been really good for the past 5 or 6 weeks. But I don't have Clemson anywhere close to number 1 because it's not boxing. You're not defending a championship from last year. We're playing a new season.
Right. Yeah. I think the eye test should be used, like if there's, like to me, it would have to be clear. Like it would have to be like overwhelming that Ohio State is better than LSU for me to move them ahead of LSU. Or take Georgia and Alabama. Other than the Piper trolls, there is nobody on planet Earth who thinks Alabama is clearly better than Georgia. I don't think so. Could they be better? Yeah, but not clearly better. So you have to compare resumes on those two in terms of who would be 4 or 5, if that's what you were looking at. And Alabama has the better loss. Georgia has the better wins. And this is something else that might not be fair, but you know this. It matters when you lose. And it's a benefit to Georgia that they lost a month ago, and Alabama lost 3 days ago. That might not be right, but that plays into it. You know what I mean?
And that's an interesting point, because if we're looking to select the 4 best teams, then of course, if a team arrives December 1st or championship weekend and they lost their first 4 games of the season, they won 8 straight, we still have to discount them because it just doesn't make sense to put them into the playoffs. But they're for a lot of people, it goes beyond resume, and it's almost a weighted system that the closer you get, the further down the season, that those games count more, because that's more reflective of what team you're going to be selecting to go to the playoffs. Not the team that won games in September, but the team that you're selecting right now that's going to play, that's playing a much different brand of football. And so you bring up a great point. So that's almost a weighted resume, that the more recent the games, the more they should be taken into consideration.
If Georgia would have beat Florida the weekend that we lost to South Carolina, and we would have lost to South Carolina the weekend that we beat Georgia, we would not be. You know what I'm saying? If those 2 games were flip-flopped on the calendar, Georgia would be 5 and Bama would be 4. But Georgia has had time between the South Carolina game and now to make that up with a quality win over Florida.
Yeah, and that's an interesting argument, because the resume is exactly the same. But there's a thought that, okay, Georgia's fixed its problems. They have made up for that South Carolina game by now facing a top 10 team and showing that they're decidedly better than that team, rather than, they beat Florida 8 weeks ago, and, man, they're having issues. Now they just lost to South Carolina. And so what team are we putting in the playoffs?
And, the schedule, Georgia having Notre Dame on the schedule and Alabama having Duke, Western Carolina, Southern Miss, and whatever other school of the blind they play. Like week 1, if Alabama would have beat Wisconsin week 1, or Oregon like Auburn did, or, not even an elite team, a team that's in the teens, any team like a top 20 team, they'd probably be 4. But they don't have anything to offset that LSU loss.
All these years, it hasn't mattered what Alabama's done in regards to out-of-conference scheduling, because they've been so dominant, and most of the times clearly a top 4 team, other than that 2017 where they were given the benefit of the doubt. But you're right. Alabama fans won't have any room to cry when you schedule 3 nobodies and maybe even 4, Duke. You really didn't
and even Duke,
show us anything.
Even Duke, you play on a neutral field. You won't play them there.
Yeah.
And other years, like I think was it last year? Anyway, a lot of years, these articles come out from these Vegas people, Alabama would be a double-digit favorite over any team in America on a neutral field. But, like, that's not the case this year. Like, Ohio State could beat Alabama. I'm not saying they would, but they could. Clemson could beat Alabama. LSU could and did beat Alabama. Georgia could beat. Like, there's a lot of teams that, you know, it would be less than a touchdown one way or the other with Alabama. So they're not clearly, like you said, they're not clearly the top of the heap this year like they have been years past. And I think that schedule's going to end up biting them this year. I really do. Somebody's going to pass. Even if Georgia loses to LSU, somebody's going to pass them. I don't know who it'll be. Baylor, maybe if they run the table. Maybe Oklahoma, if they run the table. Oregon, I think, has the best chance to pass some of the teams that are behind them. Minnesota, I think we're done hearing about them after this coming weekend. I think they might lose.
Yeah, I think Minnesota's going to lose at some point here with Wisconsin coming up as well. Now, the interesting thing is going to be
coming off that big win.
Yeah, I think Minnesota's going to have enough of a resume that they can lose a game as long as it's a respectable score, win a Big Ten championship game, and get in at 12-1. I don't know that Baylor has enough to do that. In that conference with a real horrible, not that Minnesota had a good non-conference schedule, but Baylor's was like bottom of the barrel awful non-conference schedule.
Yeah, it was real bad. They didn't play a single Power 5 team, did they, in their three non-conference?
No. They do this every year. Baylor, I jump on Baylor every year.
Yeah. Oklahoma plays Tennessee next year. I almost feel sorry for the ball fan. They're going to end the season on such a high note this year, and then they got to play Oklahoma early in the year next year.
Oklahoma, BYU, Georgia State, does it really matter?
It wouldn't have mattered this year. I don't know. It might matter next year. I don't know.
I think they'll be a little bit better. They're playing better football now. They just played Oklahoma back-to-back years just a few years ago. And they signed them again.
Yeah, play them again next year. I'll let you go. I want a percentage from you, though, real quick on the Bob Stoops to Florida State.
Whether I would want him to coach my team at Florida State if I was there?
No. What's the percentage that he gets the job?
Bob Stoops at Florida State. I don't know if this is just smoke and mirrors or what it is. I would say that I'm going to go 30%.
I mean, you don't think he's trying to use Florida State as leverage to get a raise from the Dallas, whatever the hell, in the XFL? I mean, if he's talking to him, he must have some interest. I mean, whatever Dallas can pay him, they're already paying him that, I'm sure.
That's almost like a part-time job, that thing. It's really not taking that seriously.
Is that going to last, or is it going to be the AFL all over again?
I don't think anybody's going to pay too much attention to it. But I just remember hearing his comments once he got the job. You could tell the guy's still going to be on the golf course most of the time, going to fundraisers, going to all sorts of other events. And this was kind of an afterthought. Like, it's a name coach. We hired him, and he'll show up for the games and a few practices.
Oh, my God. I got to go. Myles Garrett's chasing me with a helmet.
Uncle Lou must have picked up on something that happened there at the Browns game. Yeah, Pouncey threw punches at Garrett following helmet swing at Rudolph. See, I missed this. I'm going to have to go back and check this out, see what this is all about. Inexcusable. Oh, boy. My man Myles Garrett. What's he doing? All right, so we had a little altercation with Pouncey and Mayfield, and Myles Garrett jumped in. Okay, Mark Rogers, TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's DeAndre. I'm sorry I had to make a quick drive, my late night job.
That's quite all right.
I was just saying, I see a lot of Miami fans. They were kept talking about him. And I'm like, I saw that he visited Miami. Well, he signed with Miami, and I'm like, wow, that was kind of shocking if he did. Not saying that Miami's a bad program for recruits in their history, but I was trying to figure out what was going on. That's why I wanted to see Cam's answer. I don't know if you ever got a chance to ask the question, but I wanted to know what was the details of Flo going on.
I don't believe that Cam is that optimistic that Justin Flo is going to land at Miami, but he certainly thinks that they should go full throttle because they are getting him to campus. He is visiting, so he is interested to a degree. But he was certainly not confident a month ago when Miami was playing like garbage. Now that they're playing better, he seems to be more interested.
Right. And I was listening to you talk to Uncle Lou just a few minutes ago, and I know what you're gonna tell me. They played Miami and Florida in the '90s, but ACC was in the same state that Florida State was in the '90s, and I just think people give Clemson too much a hard time about their schedule. They play South Carolina and they play Texas A&M. They play an SEC team every year. It's not Clemson's fault that these teams suck. I mean, everybody thought Texas A&M was going to be a lot better this year. I thought South Carolina was going to be real good. They haven't played yet, but with Bentley coming back at quarterback, Feaster transferring, and over there, everybody thought South Carolina was going to be better than what they are. I just don't think that you can blame these schools. I mean, I heard Jimbo Fisher. We had this conversation before. Jimbo Fisher said you got to spread the wealth around and play some of these smaller schools. Now, I don't think everybody should do what Baylor did, like I heard you say. Play Southeastern State, play a bunch of teams that they know they're gonna beat by 67 and nothing. And
Baylor hasn't played a ranked non-conference game since 1995.
Right. So, Robert, Mark, and I ain't gonna keep it long. I gotta give other people a chance to talk. But you know what I think that this scheduling really bad teams started at? I think it started with Kansas State back in the '90s when Snyder got there. Like they used to play Utah Valley State, New Mexico. They just get a bunch of wins where they get the bowl, they get bowl eligible and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where that all started at. That's where I remember it coming from.
Well,
I
teams
don't know if you agree with me on that one, but
teams have been playing bad teams forever to a certain extent, but yeah, the bowl and the payout of the bowl is an incentive for. I will take North Carolina State as a classic example. If you look at North Carolina State's schedules throughout, the last 15 years, they've picked up a couple decent games with a West Virginia the last couple of years, but most of the time it's a lot of East Carolinas on their schedule because they know that they can go 2-6 in the ACC, win 4 lousy non-conference games, and get to a bowl game and get paid $1.5 million or more than that now to go to a marginal bowl game.
right.
And that's the formula. If you
it wasn't the easy game about 5 years ago.
yeah,
The East Carolina game. Yeah, that wasn't an easy game 5 years ago.
the two things I'm going to say about Clemson's schedule, the two things I will say about Clemson's scheduling, DeAndre, is you're right. Clemson does not need to make any excuses for the ACC. It's not their problem, not their fault. They're in the ACC. The ACC was arguably the best conference in college football just 3 years ago. It's awful right now. There's not a clear number 2 team. Right. It might be Wake Forest. It might be Virginia. And if they are the second best team in the ACC, they're like the 25th, 30th, 35th best team in the country. They just don't have a number 2 team or 3 or 4 or 5 that are legit top 15 or 20 teams. That's not Clemson's problem. That's not their fault. That's not their issue. And as you mentioned, they play South Carolina every year. And sometimes South Carolina is going to be 11-1 like they were 3 consecutive years, or they had an 11-win team 3 consecutive years near the end of Spurrier's run, or they're not going to be good like they haven't been most of the last 5 years. Clemson can't control that.
Right.
South Carolina is most of the time going to be a 7-5, 8-4 type team. So that's a decent win. It's not an elite win, but it's a rivalry that they need to play for the state. People want to see that game. It's tradition. To Clemson's credit,
And going to East,
To
Right.
Clemson's credit, they go out there and they schedule another game. Georgia a lot, Auburn a lot. The last 2 years, Texas A&M. And they're expecting those teams to be really, really good. And they have been most of the time. They played 2 really good Auburn teams. They played Georgia a number of times in the early 2010s when Georgia was not as good as they are now, but really good. And they can't help that Texas A&M has fallen off this year and not been as good as we expected them to be. They still went out there and took on another SEC team, and that's now like 8 times in the last dozen years that they've played an SEC team, in addition to South Carolina. Okay, the other side of the argument, DeAndre, though, is that we're in a situation in which we have to evaluate schedules. If we were in an objective playoff system, then the teams would just reach the playoff based on their own merit. But we've got to evaluate the teams. Therefore, we've got to take into consideration who they play and their schedule. And it's not Clemson's fault, but we've got to take their schedule into account
Right.
to evaluate
I
them.
totally agree with you on that part. I totally agree with you, but I see all the schedules. Like Alabama. I understand why they paid on neutral field, because we had this conversation before. It's because of recruiting. And so I guess they sent out a flyer or sent a survey to see who want to play them on a neutral site field. I mean, nobody knew Louisville was going to fall off that last year like they did. After Lamar Jackson and no players were going to just give up and not give a damn about the team. I don't think anybody saw that coming, because I think people consider Bobby Petrino pretty good coach. But I just think sometimes with the schedule and stuff, and you can't really blame them. Like, I'll give you an example. Not get me wrong, Ohio State's a great team. Ohio State did Wisconsin. Wisconsin shut out, 4 teams? In the beginning of the season, like 4 or 5 teams?
Yes.
So they were looking really good. And then all of a sudden, they're going to lose the streak. And some people started, as they got more tape on them, they got exposing Wisconsin for what they really were. The guy couldn't throw the ball. The quarterback that's back there right now, he can't throw the ball. So if you take Taylor away, he can't throw the ball. So my question is, how harder is Ohio State's schedule right now than Clemson? Don't get me wrong. I know they play Penn State and Michigan coming down the line, but I mean, up to this point, I don't think their schedule is any harder than Clemson. I don't think Wisconsin, which is probably their best win, is any better than Texas A&M, and they were to play. I don't think they are. I mean, you might say they are, but I don't think they're any better. I just think that sometimes we got to look at it. I know what you're saying. We got to look at everything, but that's one thing that irritates the hell out of me, because I like it's not the fault that these guys suck. Nobody saw Florida State falling off like they did. I mean, it was like, wow, like, what happened to Florida State? And it was coming way before Willie Taggart, because the players were down there in Florida State were saying, hey, he was letting Jamie Wilson get away with this stuff, so why can't we do it too? So, but I'll give some other people a chance to call in. Mark, I appreciate you letting me call in. Hey, man, I appreciate the show, man. You give us a talking point and inspiring us to be make our own shows and stuff like that. So I really do appreciate that.
Thanks, DeAndre. You have a great night. Enjoy the football. All right, Mark Rogers, TV, the voice of college football, and please call in 860-325-3687. I'm a little bit limited in regards to access to laptops and what I can look at in regards to schedules and so forth. I did want to run through the big Week 12 games. And again, if you've made a comment on the live chat and you want me to take that comment and you think that that comment should be on the screen, what I basically do is I run through all the comments. I start at the very first comment, and unless somebody's having a private conversation with somebody else, which is great, I want you guys to do that, I'm not going to take those comments to the screen because they don't make any sense to anyone else. And I don't take anything that's that offensive to the screen. Other than that, I take all the comments and I put them on the screen. But understand that the application I use only allows me to go back so far. So if I grab a certain comment, then the stream readjusts. I can't go back and grab every comment. So don't be offended if I don't bring your comment to the screen, as many people are apt to do. All right, so yeah, we've got this Iowa game hosting Minnesota. Let's see what the Gophers have after they played such an exceptional game on both sides of the ball against Penn State. Even though they only won by 5, they were clearly in control of that game and decidedly the better team on that day. The wide receiver core with Rashad Bateman and Chris Autumn-Bell and, of course, Tyler Johnson looked near elite, not best in the Big Ten, but third or fourth best unit, wide receiver unit in the Big Ten. They've got 3 exceptional running backs. They've got a massive offensive line. Tanner Morgan has turned into a very capable quarterback, not dynamic, doesn't have a big arm, but he is accurate. 18 out of 20 accurate, and those were difficult throws he was making. Not an 18 out of 20 against air, 18 out of 20. I did not see the Purdue game about 5 weeks ago, but he hit, what was the number? He only missed 1 pass in that game, I think 21 of 22. The defense is really good. Antoine Winfield's an exceptional cornerback. They have excellent safeties. They've got a legit top 10 defensive backfield at Minnesota. But they've played their hearts out. They played lights out. Can they maintain that? Because they're going on the road. And we've never seen a scene at Minnesota like we saw last week. And Minnesota's been, over the last 15 or 20 years, a decent program. A lot of 8-4 Minnesota teams. But when you're going 8-4 at Minnesota and you're finishing barely in the top 25, you're not playing games like they played against Penn State last week. At this point of the season, they're watching Wisconsin or Iowa go to a Big Ten championship game, and they're out of it. They're plodding along at 5-3 or 6-3, and they're headed to the Holiday Bowl. So they haven't had this kind of pressure before. And to maintain that level of play and to go to Kinnick Stadium, and we see what Iowa's done in the last few years against Penn State. Not that they've won the games, but they've taken Penn State to the wire. And, of course, what they did to Ohio State in 2017 at home and have routinely done to teams over and over and over at Kinnick Stadium with that defense. And Iowa's got a legit defense. They have issues blocking people. And that's surprising because Kirk Ferentz typically coaches up the offensive line, and Iowa produces almost as many NFL offensive linemen as anyone. But their offensive line this year is not good. Nathan Stanley's got an NFL arm, but he is erratic. So can Minnesota back up their play last week on the road? I will be utterly impressed. Even though Iowa's not a great team, they're a legit top 20 team in the nation. If Minnesota can go to Iowa this week and back up that Penn State performance and win again, that is going to be impressive. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's George. How you doing?
George, it's been a while. How are you?
It's been a little while. But, man, I don't know where to start. This is the part of the year we all wait for. Things matter. It is the playoffs already. Every game's the playoffs now.
For most teams. For most teams.
For the good teams.
No.
Teams,
For the good teams, yes, but there's an exception for a few teams here and there that can lose a game. So when I hear that all the time, that every week's an elimination week, for almost everyone.
It's an elimination week for everybody that's undefeated is definitely an elimination week for them, pretty much. Maybe not LSU, but anyway.
I get your point.
That's not what I want to talk about. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is, I think, is it possible that Myles Garrett will get the first fucking lifetime suspension and maybe be taken to criminal?
I got to see this. I'm just looking at the bottom line on TV, and I hear Uncle Lou make a comment about it.
Can I tell you what happened?
Absolutely.
Myles Garrett comes busting in and comes crashing down on Mason Rudolph, Pittsburgh quarterback, right?
Okay.
And takes the ground, just won't let it go and stuff, and then he rips his fucking helmet off.
and walks away huffing. And Mason Rudolph jumps up and like goes after him, like, get my helmet back, and he smashes the helmet down on Rudolph's head. And then 2 or 3 Pittsburgh players jump on Myles Garrett, just ensue beating his fucking ass.
Okay, George. Language.
I've never seen anything like it. It was like that movie, The Last Boy Scout, with Bruce Willis, where the guy pulls out a gun and starts shooting people. It was real close to that. It was dramatic. Oh my God. Google it. Watch it while we're talking. Yeah, you can do it. Like, it's only 2 minutes long.
Okay. I don't think people would appreciate that, but I will be watching this. Believe me, I will watch this. I'm a big NFL guy, and this looks like it's going to be the story of the week. If all that happened.
To take some heat off of the fake presidential thing and the other fake thing that's going on, it's like, we're going to talk about this shit for a week. I mean, this stuff for a week. All right. It's the best time of the year for college football. This is what we live for from here on out. There's just every week, every game matters so much, even to everybody. Just if you're even close to getting there, just think now. Miami has a chance if they go into beat Clemson. You see, it changes everything. Everything has just come down to the wire now. Ohio State, anybody, I dare you. I mean, you still might get in those. That's the problem. LSU still might get in. Yeah, there's some teams sitting pretty, boy.
How about your Florida Gators?
Well, listen, if Georgia loses twice and we beat LSU in the SEC championship game, I think we'll get in. I think we'll play Clemson.
Now, there's a scenario for you.
Or Ohio State, whoever happens to be sitting there. And if we beat them, we get to play Clemson for the 3rd time in 1 year, and the world would go crazy. It'd be like Mardi Gras.
See, nobody's brought that scenario up. Georgia loses to Texas A&M and Auburn. Florida wins out. They go to the SEC championship game. They beat LSU. They finish 11-2. Florida in the playoff.
Right, and we beat Ohio State in the first round, and we play LSU, who just beat whoever else is there, and go and play them for the 3rd time. And it would be Mardi Gras. It would be Mardi Gras worldwide. Everyone would tune in. So
George, if that happens, I'm going to fire up a live stream. I'm going to get you on here and give you a full hour, 2 hours, whatever you want.
Right, I'm not like you. I'm not the voice of college football, and I don't have great guess and analysis. I had to do a lot of thinking to come up with this one. I'm just focused. How can we get in? What can we do? How good could it be? That's my analysis.
All right, George.
Georgia, I feel sorry for Georgia, my beloved brothers of the SEC East. I think if they hired like Bob Stoops or Mike Leach, just anybody but Kirby Smart, 22 5-stars, and they lost to South Carolina at home in front of 93,000 fans. So instead of hating Georgia, I feel sorry for them now, and that's the worst insult possible. I feel sorry for them. Oh my God, I think they have 0% chance of beating Auburn. Auburn's not going to be at home on national television in front of 93,000 fans and lose to Georgia. It just won't happen. They'll find a way around it. They'll win by 1. They don't care.
I'm glad, George, that my bank account is not dependent on your predictions. That's all I know.
Well, Saturday.
We will.
I've only been wrong this year. I only pick certain games. I pick the game that I care about the most and take the team I want to win the most and just see what happens. I don't care. I'm not dead. Don't use me for betting advice unless I prove to be true over a long period of time. And I really can't bet on Florida Georgia games either. You know what I'm saying? Uncle Lou won't pick the Georgia games because I'm going to take Florida no matter what.
All right, George.
All
I think we're grinding to a halt here.
All right, someday tell me I don't want to use my bank card to make bets online. I want to go down to Walmart or Winco or whatever kind of store you have around there, Piggly Wiggly, whatever it is, and get a card off the rack and use that card to gamble. Can I do that?
Well, you can't do it now. That day's coming. It may take a while.
Gamble. advertise Bet Now or whatever.
Yes.
I don't know how to access it. How do I do that?
There's a link. I supply a link down below. You click on the link.
Can you have one of your representatives call me and tell me?
One of my representatives. Let's see. What do I do? What do I do? Do I disguise my voice? Is that what I do? As being one of my representatives?
I don't know how to give them money and get my money back. I don't know how to do it. I want to do it. I'm not stupid. But when I clicked on there and I looked at all this shit, I don't know. I'm not using my bank account number. I want to use something separate from me, like a debit card that I buy at a store.
Okay, you've gone way into the weeds, way beyond my knowledge of internet gambling.
How do you bet? You just use your regular credit card and do it?
I have in the past, yes. You know, George, you're better for not getting involved in all of that.
I would only bet on select games every once in a while when I think the fix is in. I think I got to figure out.
Well, how do you do that?
I'm usually, you just look at the whole big picture of things. Like it's a scenario you picture. How's it going to unfold?
No. I'm not talking about how you make the bet, how you make a selection of the team. How do you execute the bet then?
You have a bookie, or you go find a casino that will make those kind of bets.
Sure.
In Oregon, the state I live, they're going to make a state-run lottery. It's already a done deal. They used to have this, Mark. I won $1,100 one week with betting $40. It's good shit, man. It's pari-mutuel. And they took it away, and now they're bringing it back. But this time, we're not just going to get to bet on college. We're going to get to bet. We're not just going to get on pros. It's pro and college. Official state lottery with point spreads.
How is that a lottery?
Huh?
Are you using the term a lottery correctly?
It's the Oregon State Lottery, the one that runs all the lottery shit. We used to be able to bet on pro football, but they went, hey, that ain't right, And now it's like 10 years later, they're bringing it back, but with college too. And it's pari-mutuel after 4 bets. If you bet more, if you only bet 4 teams, it's 10 to 1 odds. But if you go over 4, it's pari-mutuel. It depends on how many people bet. So, it's big. It's a big deal, man. They'll do this nationally pretty soon.
My viewership in Oregon is not what it should be, so I think we're putting some people to sleep, George.
You know what? Yeah, Oregon's hopeless, man. I'm so sad for them. People try to act like there's an Oregon team and all that. It's just advertising.
They've got nice uniforms. They show off the uniforms, and that's what they're around for, George. I appreciate you calling.
All right, later. The whole Pac-12 is just not fair. There will never be the SEC team in the final, ever. Later, Mark. Love you.
See you, George. Good to hear from you.
Bye.
Haven't heard from George in a long time. See him in there in the live chat, and he's taken us to the Oregon gambling scene. All right. Eli is asking, I see, is the Big Ten really better than the Big 12? In a word, yes, the Big Ten is better than the Big 12. What I would ask you to do, Eli, a little homework. Rank the 14 teams in the Big Ten. Rank the 10 teams in the Big 12. Unfortunately, you've got a 10 and 14 comparison, so that doesn't work. So you got to take 4 teams out of the Big 10, but just generally match them up and run through those matchups and see who you think would win those games. I believe that until you get to the lower tiers of the Big Ten, that the Big Ten would show itself to be a better conference than the Big 12. Not substantially better. I think the Big 12 is competitive. The Big 12 this year is suffering from much of what the Pac-12 has suffered from in recent years. The Pac-12 plays a decent brand of football, and if you go 6, 7, 8 deep in the Pac-12 versus maybe 6, 7, 8 deep in the Big Ten, then you start to see where the conferences are fairly equal. The problem is the Pac-12 top 3 or 4 can't match up with the Big Ten top 3 or 4, and that's what people focus on. That's what really matters when you talk about elite play, college football playoff participation. And so the tops of these conferences matter more than the depth of the conference, because everybody's hypersensitive and hyper-focused on the college football playoff. All right, let's go through the schedule for week 12 and see what we've got here, and we'll get everybody's thoughts and mine as well. Week 12. Somebody actually mentioned early in the chat about Kent State's big comeback. I think they were down by 21 or 24 points tonight. They came back and beat Buffalo 30-27. The Golden Flashes. I'm a Golden Flash, technically. I don't know when the last time I watched a Kent State football game. It was when they went to the MAC championship game in 2015. That would be the last time I watched a Kent State football game. All right, what I'm going to be watching this Saturday would be at noon. We've got Alabama at Mississippi State, Indiana at Penn State, Florida, Missouri, Wisconsin's at Nebraska, Michigan State, Oklahoma State hosts Kansas. Those are the noon Eastern time games that matter, along with TCU at Texas Tech. Not really. My number one game there is going to be, I'm intrigued by Indiana at 7-2. Really haven't beaten anyone. A lot of people jumped on my omission of Indiana in my top 25 since they are 7-2, and I have a number of 6-3 teams in my top 25 that I still believe to have a much better resume than Indiana's 7-2. But if the Hoosiers tack on a win against Penn State, welcome to the top 25 that actually makes sense. Indiana Penn State's got my attention at noon, followed by, sometimes I get fooled a little bit by the name brands and it still lures me in. Wisconsin, Nebraska sounds like a good game. Probably not going to be one. Nebraska has folded to a certain extent. Florida, Missouri, interesting game. Mizzou's, I believe, 4-3, have won 4 of 7 against the Gators since joining the SEC. Michigan State, that's one I typically don't miss. But Michigan State has been just so incredibly awful, blowing a 25-point lead to Illinois last week. So a number of decent games at noon, but nothing earth-shattering. Again, Penn State still in the college football playoff scenario. And other than that, a lot of teams just jockeying for, in Wisconsin's case, needing to win out to go to the Big Ten championship game potentially. And for Michigan, just trying to get to a really good bowl game. A New Year's Six game is still in the realm of possibility for the Wolverines. Later in the day, our 3:30 window, and I'm currently sitting on Central Time, so it says 2:30 on my phone right now. Ohio State and Rutgers. The Buckeyes beat Maryland by 59. Maryland beat Rutgers by 41. Do the Buckeyes score 100? Yeah, that game's going to be a complete annihilation. Wake at Clemson. Unfortunately, the Demon Deacons did not beat Virginia Tech last week. I wanted to see, just at least to humor me and intrigue me for a quarter, that the possibility that Wake Forest, as a one-loss team in the ACC, could go to Clemson, hang around for a little while, and give us all just bizarre thoughts of Wake Forest somehow beating Clemson and taking over the Atlantic Division lead and then controlling the division. But that didn't happen. And so the Atlantic Division is locked down for Clemson already. Wake Forest at Clemson tomorrow at 3:30. Saturday at 3:30. Georgia-Auburn, of course, is the game. If I could only watch one game on Saturday, which based on the way my Saturday looks at this point, I probably will only watch one game. Georgia-Auburn would be the game, followed by Minnesota-Iowa. Baylor-Oklahoma. Yeah, those 3 games, they're definitely the 3 games of the day. Memphis at Houston, of course, Memphis, Cincinnati, Boise State. Keep your eye on those 3 schools in particular, gunning for a New Year's Six bowl. Texas is a 7-point underdog at Iowa State, if I read that correctly. West Virginia, Kansas State at 3:30 as well. But again, it's all about Georgia-Auburn at 3:30 on Saturday, followed by some interest in Clemson and Wake Forest, maybe, or maybe not. It's really Georgia-Auburn. And then, of course, then at 4 o'clock Eastern time, you got Minnesota-Iowa. So I'm going to be split on that one. Again, depending on my personal schedule Saturday afternoon. But Minnesota-Iowa, I'm going to be fascinated by that one. And then in prime time on Saturday, unfortunately, we really don't have much outside of the big game in the Big 12 with Oklahoma going to Waco to take on the Baylor Bears. And we'll see if Baylor's for real, as they say, because they have really, if you go through the Baylor schedule, they have escaped. Did you see how many times they could have lost to TCU last week? And I don't mean that Baylor made play after play after play after play to pull that game out or avoid catastrophe. They lucked out on some of those plays. Like the TCU quarterback who broke contain, who could have scored the game-winning touchdown, but he stepped out of bounds by like that much. That wasn't Baylor making a play. That was the TCU quarterback stepping out of bounds by that much, or he would have scored the game-winning touchdown and Baylor would have a loss. Baylor, there was a bad call at the end of the Texas Tech game. I don't remember exactly the sequence, but it had to do with a missed snap of the football that was misinterpreted. The rule was misinterpreted by the officials. They made the incorrect call in overtime, or Baylor would have lost to Texas Tech. They won that game in double overtime. They beat TCU in 3 overtimes and escaped that game in a number of ways. They beat West Virginia by a field goal, and the Mountaineers are no good. They kicked a last-second field goal to beat Iowa State 23-21. So Baylor, if you go undefeated, or even if you lose one game in the Big 12 and come back and win the championship game in the conference, the results are what matter. But is Baylor showing us that they are a top 5 or even top 10 team? I don't think so. I need to see them play Oklahoma, and even Oklahoma has not played well the last few weeks. Really, we're taken apart by Kansas State, and then last weekend outscored in the fourth quarter 20-0 by Iowa State, and the Cyclones could have put up the PAT and went to overtime. They went for 2, and Oklahoma escaped. So the Sooners are not playing good football, so I don't even know if the winner of this game is going to really prove that much. They're going to prove to us that they have separated themselves from the team that they just beat, but neither one of these 2 teams, Oklahoma or Baylor, are playing good football, are playing top 5 college football playoff caliber football. Neither one of them. But that's obviously the huge game of the day, along with Georgia-Auburn. I'm fascinated with that one because Georgia is really laying their season on the line. They've got the loss. They're marching on to the SEC championship game. They've got to lose twice, of course, not to make it to Atlanta. That's most likely not going to happen. So for them, it's about college football playoff and staying with the one loss. But going to Auburn is difficult. Watch the Georgia offensive line against the Auburn defensive front. They're 2 of the best units in the country. This is going to be a great game. I will be shocked. I will be surprised if this is not a really good game. So if I can only watch one game on Saturday, Georgia-Auburn by far. Minnesota-Iowa's number 2 for me, and Oklahoma-Baylor is number 3 for me. Otherwise, at night, there's little else to get excited about. LSU's arguably the best team in the country. They're my number 1. They're the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's number 1. They're Uncle Lou's number 1. They are the AP Polls number 1, I believe. Yes, resoundingly after beating Alabama. But they've been my number one. So my number ones, I've only had 2 number ones this year in the top 25 that actually makes sense. And that was Auburn from the time that they beat Oregon and posted to date at that point the best win in the country. And then they maintained it for 4 or 5 weeks until they lost to Florida. Auburn was my number one because they had the best resume. And then I elevated LSU to number one because they had the best resume once Auburn lost. Those have been my 2 number one teams the entire season. Auburn until they lost, then LSU with the best resume at number one. So I was way ahead on LSU being number one. They've been my number one for 5 or 6 weeks. Also in prime time on Saturday night, App State, Georgia State, South Carolina takes on Texas A&M. Nice little SEC matchup that means nothing, but it's just a decent game to watch. Louisville, North Carolina State on the ACC network. Late night on Fox. Okay. No, this is actually a primetime game. UCLA. If you've fallen asleep on UCLA, they'll probably be put to sleep Saturday night, but still at 4-5 with 3 games left, UCLA controls the Pac-12 South. UCLA could show up at the Pac-12 championship game. They're 4-5, but they lost 3 of those games non-conference, so they're 4-2 in the Pac-12. They're playing Utah, who is currently 5-1. So if they win that game on the road as a 21-point dog, they tie Utah, and they've got the tiebreaker over the Utes. Wouldn't that shake it up? Not going to happen, but it would be fun to see. And Arizona, Oregon, probably not going to be too competitive. Late night on ESPN, Saturday night, the Ducks are a 28-point favorite against the Wildcats, and Cal and USC on FS1 late night Saturday. So if I'm around and available, I will be watching those games certainly on Saturday night. Aside from UCLA having a puncher's chance, those games are not important to not just college football playoff races, but even conference championship races. But I love college football, so I will be all in. All right, let's see what else you guys have on the line. I am well behind the live chat here. Please check out the previews we've got this week. Georgia, Auburn, Ohio State. I won't even call it a preview against Rutgers. Ohio State football talk. We, of course, did our Florida State Miami shows on Wednesday night. Oklahoma, Baylor. I've posted a preview on that game as well. You can catch all of my predictions, which I'm currently 57% against the spread. You grab the link in the description section of any of the videos that says Voice of College Football Community, and you grab my predictions. And way beyond that, the predictions are just kind of a side note. You join our community on Patreon, and my offer each and every week to do a live, exclusive live stream with you. So you can request that, and we've had about 8 people take me up on that offer, and we've had a nice little live chat with those folks that join us on Patreon on our Voice of College Football Community. And of course, folks, Christmas is coming. You're going to be on Amazon, so why not shop Amazon using the link in the description section of any of the videos and help out the channel? All right, so we appreciate it. Thanks for jumping online. If any of you made comments or asked questions and want me to respond to those, there is no way for me to go through all the live chat and grab those. So please do this. If you've got a comment or a question that you want me to see, just copy and paste it out of the live chat and then put it in the comment section of any of the videos, and I will get to it. Or you can always contact me at markrogerstv@gmail.com. you have any requests, suggestions, recommendations for the channel, anything for me, just hit me up at markrogerstv@gmail.com. There you go. Emerson, if you're still on the line, sure, I'll take one more call. 860-325-3687. 860-325-3687. James, take care as well. We appreciate your contributions to what we do. Cheryl, George, Iron Cross, everybody else, Roots of Jesse, all of you who join me on a regular basis. I appreciate the support and the contributions. And we will be back here most of the college football weekend. I've got some personal plans, so maybe not quite as much content as we typically churn out, but we will be here throughout, of course, the college football playoffs. And we will see you very soon.